Let me also say that strategic depth is a ridiculed idea within Pakistan also. I wish that, perhaps people certainly who have much more access in Washington can actually also begin to look beyond the strategic depth. Pakistan has, strategic depth must be related to capacity of a state. The capacity of Pakistani state has come down tremendously since 9/11 for the simple reason that Pakistan has been engaged in a very continuing war. Now in this war, the capacities are bound to come down. I think if we begin to look at all these facts, we will be able to put it into perspective as far as these apprehensions are concerned. We need to also look beyond strategic depth, and that is something that Pakistanis feel and quite convincingly is not being done in Washington.
Right, let's get a response from Mr. Dhume very quickly.
My question is very simple. I mean, you and I agree on this issue. My question to you is, do you believe that everybody in Pakistan and everybody in the army and everybody in the ISI shares your view? It's a simple question. Do you think there is unanimity that your view is the only view?
Yeah, we could get... Of course, Mr. Dhume, it's not like this. It's the way you would say that some elements, we have been hearing this for the long time, that some elements in Pakistan army or in ISI, they are colliding with the Taliban or the insurgents. Why should we? For Pakistan, a stable Afghanistan is the prime interest of Pakistan, because we have suffered your wars, American wars, for the last 32 years. And we don't want to suffer anymore. We want a peaceful Afghanistan where a stable government is there. Pakistan's stability will be guaranteed by a stable Afghanistan. What is American interest in Afghanistan? If we forgo that the theory that it came for oil or to control the Central Asian oil reserves, you came here to get Osama and you got stuck over here. You have got Osama. Now your interest is, the only interest you have left is that to have a peaceful, safe withdrawal which doesn't look like a defeat like Vietnam. That you have to ensure with good relations with Pakistan. Blowing up Haqqani out of proportion won't help. 10,000 people, they are not in North Waziristan. Yes, there are elements in North Waziristan. Yes, there is a Haqqani group in North Waziristan. What about the Pashtun provinces which NATO has abandoned? There are FM radios.
If I could get a quick response. I'm going to get a quick response from our guest in New York as well. Mr. Cohen, I want to get to this question, and we've sort of been dancing around this issue, but the general sentiment in Pakistan seems to be that the United States has failed in Afghanistan. It has not been able to achieve its objectives of stabilizing Afghanistan, and now there is this idea that the Haqqani network is being used, and by extension the Pakistan government is being used as a scapegoat to blame all the issues and problems in Afghanistan on them. How do you respond to that?
Look, there are many reasons why I think the U.S. is failing in Afghanistan, but one of the main reasons is that the insurgents against whom they're fighting a war have safe haven in Pakistan. Okay, this is simply a fact, and I think everyone knows this. Now, you can argue, if you want, that the Pakistanis are not actively supporting the insurgency. I think that's wrong. I think there's a lot of evidence that says they are. And there's a good reason for them to support the insurgency. It's in their political interest to do so. But the very fact that those safe havens exist, they're basically unmolested, the Pakistanis allow them to exist, is an indication to me at least that they view the Haqqani network, they view the Quetta Shura as strategic allies in some respects for their own political interests.
But there's also this argument, right, that you just simply can't go after these guys, right? The Pakistan government doesn't have the capacity, doesn't have the army to do it, and if you do go after them, you'll create blowback. That's the general argument as to why you can't just go after these the safe havens in North Waziristan.
Sure, that's the argument, but that also there's a price to be paid for doing that. I mean, I find it hard to believe that there's no way to go after these guys. But at the same time, if you don't go after them and they keep doing what they're doing, you're going to have a civil war in Afghanistan. I mean, the fact is, when the Haqqani network attacks the U.S. embassy in Kabul, it's not a military act; it's a political act. I mean, their intention is to show to the Afghan people and to show to those interested in reconciliation that there is no chance for reconciliation. Okay, and it increases the probability of a civil war. Certainly, the Rabbani assassination makes it even more a possibility of a civil war. So, if the Pakistani goal here is to have peace in Afghanistan, as my colleagues in Pakistan have said, then these actions are not furthering that goal at all. They're actually making the opposite occur, which is more violence and more instability in Afghanistan. The Pakistani position on this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because on the one hand, they're basically, you have some arm of, and I believe Admiral Mullen, some arm of the ISI supporting the Kine network, supporting insurgent attacks against U.S. forces, against the Afghan government in Afghanistan. While on the other hand, you have people in the civilian government saying, well, we want a peaceful reconciliation. The Pakistanis have to make a choice which way they want to go. And if they want reconciliation, and I think they do, and I think it's in their best interest to have reconciliation, they need to pursue a strategy that actually makes that goal possible. What we've seen over the past couple of weeks and months is the opposite. We've seen measures that have been terrorist attacks that have occurred that have weakened the case for reconciliation and have made it more likely that when the U.S. does leave Afghanistan, you're going to have a replay of the 90s in a civil war. And that's, I think, what Pakistan, unfortunately, is aiding and abetting by their current policies.
Right. That's an interesting point. We'll pick it up from there when we get back from the break. Stay with us.
Welcome back. You're watching The Platform, and tonight we are discussing a very important topic. The buzz is all about Pakistan's alleged involvement with the Haqqani network, and we'll also, during the program, focus on the reconciliation talk status now that the government head for negotiations with Taliban, Burhanuddin Rabbani, is no longer in this world. But you wanted to react to what Mr. Cohen was saying, Mr. Chaudhry.
I don't want to go round and round on making this argument, but the fact that all these people came into Pakistan because the United States attacked Afghanistan, bombed Afghanistan, and so they ran. Unfortunately, without any precautions taken as far as the boundary was concerned, whether that side or this side, but it was an American initiative. And so ever since we've been fighting the war for America, Pakistan too has been fighting the war for America. It's expanded into our own territories. Please keep in mind, 478 Al-Qaeda members were either apprehended, killed, or sent to Guantanamo. Many of those are still perhaps in Guantanamo. Keep in mind that 48 of these were the highest in the hierarchy as far as Al-Qaeda was concerned. Keep in mind that a large number of Taliban have been shot and killed. But keep in mind the Swat operation and what has gone in South Waziristan are two major operations. That is, why would the Haqqani network be taken out of this particular? Then the next thing, counterpoint that I would like to make is, what is it that we must do? Let's say we would like to kill all the Haqqani group members. That's perhaps one possibility. I don't know whether we can kill 20,000 or all of them. If we can't, so what is the best? Rather, when the United States leave Afghanistan, you need to have a stable political setup. If you have 10,000 estranged Taliban somewhere around in Kabul or somewhere in Afghanistan, I don't think it will be a peaceful, stable political setup. And finally, if you have three groups that you only want to reconciliate with estranged Taliban. And there are three groups of estranged Taliban, the Mullah Omar group, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, and the Haqqani. Why would you not like to talk peace with all three? Why do you want to single out Haqqani and talk to the other two? Those are some of the hanging questions that perhaps we need to look at before we complete our arguments.
Okay. And very briefly, Colonel Munir, I'm just curious to find out, what kind of presence does the Haqqani network have now in North Waziristan, so many years after the war on terror began in this region?
You say, Waqas, no census has been carried out, but here, of course, they are there. There's no doubt that elements of Haqqani network, I don't call it network, Americans have given it a name, anyhow, they are there. Just next to it is Khost. If they are attacking from North Waziristan, why does the American or ISAF forces don't stop them over there?
Right, that's one of the issues. Let's ask
why don't they stop?
Yeah, let's ask this question to Mr. Cohen. And this is one of the arguments that Colonel Munir has been pointing out, Mr. Cohen, for quite some time now. The attacks that Pakistan has faced in areas such as Lower Dir very recently, occurring from the Afghan side of the Pak-Afghan border. And many argue that that cannot happen without the information, at least, of the Afghan government and the NATO forces that are present there.
Well, I mean, that may be the case, but it's not credible to argue then that Pakistani attacks in Afghanistan happen without the knowledge of the Pakistani government. I mean, to the earlier question of why it is the U.S. hasn't gone after Haqqani Network, why hasn't gone after the Quetta Shura, I mean, my colleagues know the answer to this. It's because the Pakistani government doesn't want the U.S. to do that. I mean, the drone strike the U.S. Flies into Pakistan happened largely in concert with the Pakistani government. These aren't just a random war the U.S. is fighting. It's a war they're fighting in concert with the Pakistanis. And the Pakistanis do not want the U.S. to go after these groups. And in fact, I think my colleagues would agree that if the U.S. made a serious effort to defeat the Haqqani Network in Pakistan, it would create a crisis between our two countries, maybe possibly a military conflict. So I think that it's sort of it's obvious at this point that the Pakistanis have at least some control over these groups and are not exercising control to stop. For the same thing, if you can't recognize Pakistan is also engaging in cross-border conflict.
Right. Mr. Dhume, I want to ask you this question. I mean, we're dancing around this question of whether or not the Pakistani government, any part of it, the ISI, as Admiral Mullen said, supports the Haqqani Network or not. I mean, the question of links have always been there, and even General Athar Abbas said links have been maintained by other governments as well. But the question of active support, seems to be the sticking point between the two sides, Pakistan and the United States. If we are to move beyond that, if we are to sort of look at this more holistically, what does the United States now do, and what does Pakistan now do to address this problem? And how can they address it if there's no agreement on the basic sort of fundamental facts?
That's a very good question. I mean, it's almost as though the two countries are operating in alternate realities. I personally believe the Mullen statement. I believe that he chooses his words carefully. There's a vast amount of evidence. As Mr. Cohen said, this is not something that is new to anyone who's been following this. We've seen it discussed in WikiLeaks cables, we've seen it in off-the-record briefings and so on. What's important over here is that this has come out in the open now. The question is, do you believe Admiral Mullen, or do you believe the people in the Pakistani government who say no, there's no such thing?
Or General Kayani himself said these are
now, and people are going to believe different people. I happen to believe Admiral Mullen. I happen to believe the reports that suggest that there was a cell phone trail from the attack on the American embassy and NATO in Kabul and so on. There's a very, very long and very, very well documented record of the ISI engaging with and supporting such groups. So it's sort of, I mean, to me it beggars belief to suddenly turn around and say that, well, no, they don't have this. I believe that, and if the Pakistanis don't believe it, it creates a real problem, because what's effectively happening is that Pakistan is living in an alternate reality, and it's an alternate reality that puts it on a collision course with the world's only superpower. And I think that it's a sort of, people need to ask themselves a very, very sobering question: is that in Pakistan's best interest?
I want to ask this question of AVM Chaudhry Shahzad. Do you think Pakistan is living in an alternate reality? Is it something that the both sides simply cannot agree on, and that, as Mr. Dhume said, that could lead to potential conflict down the road?
You see, the difference of understanding in Washington or in American think tanks or the American government, and therefore that's the same in Pakistan. I would just say that if the US wants to believe in what Admiral Mike Mullen has said, the Pakistanis tend to believe in what the Pakistani government and the Pakistani military is saying. If we want to stick to these positions, perhaps we should. I mean, that's where we come down to, and if that is how Afghanistan must drift into some sort of a closure, that is how Afghanistan will drift into that closure. A couple of questions, and before I make those questions, I also want to refer to the Senator Graham's statement, possibly, in which he made a statement and said that Pakistan must be asked directly, are you with the Haqqanis or are you with the United States of America? I think the response from Pakistan is very clear. We're neither with the Haqqanis nor with the United States of America, we are with Pakistan. And my questions, when you get to all those briefings in Washington, do they ever mention that the CIA has also maintained a very active contact with the Haqqani network? Does Admiral Mike Mullen say that? And if not, I'm afraid he's being little less than entirely honest about what he's saying. Also the fact that has the United States ever been in contact with the Haqqani group for negotiation, reconciliation, reintegration? If so, the Pakistani government, the Pakistani decision makers say, if you want to reconciliate and reintegrate Mr. Haqqani, Why are you pushing us to take him on and engage ourselves into a war from which perhaps we may never come out? You might leave Afghanistan in 2014. Pakistan will still have to continue to fight this war, and the position we are in, I don't think we can start a third war or a third front in this particular war. It's gone on too long for Pakistan's own good now.
Right.
If I can just ask you a quick follow-up.